India has spent 2 decades building something nobody predicted, a diplomatic playbook that lets it shelter Iranian sailors and buy Israeli weapons in the same week, house Chinese warships at naval reviews while conducting military exercises with America, sign free trade agreements with Europe while maintaining energy partnerships with Russia. This isn't confusion. This is the most sophisticated strategic balancing act any major power is attempting right now, and it's working, until suddenly it isn't. January 2026, India signed a landmark free trade agreement with the European Union. 97% of EU tariff lines eliminated. Zero duty access for labor-intensive Indian exports, the largest trade deal in India's history. 1 month later, the United Kingdom finalized its own comprehensive agreement with New Delhi. Two of the world's wealthiest markets locked in. India didn't fire a shot, it signed documents. But here's what those signatures actually represent. Economic leverage converted into geopolitical weight. When India negotiates trade access for its pharmaceuticals, it's also negotiating political space to maintain relationships Europe disapproves of. When Brussels gives India tariff-free textile exports, India gets room to maneuver on Iran. Trade deals aren't just about goods crossing borders. They're about buying the freedom to operate outside the binary choices that trap smaller nations. India's manufacturing sector tells the same story in harder numbers. 16% of GDP, 27 million workers, 6.5% annual growth projected through 2035. Electronics manufacturing alone is on track to hit $604 billion by 2032. That's not incremental progress, it's structural transformation. In 2017, high-technology goods made up 7% of India's manufacturing exports. By 2024, that share jumped to 19%. The driver? Smartphones. Apple shipped 22.9 million units from India in the first half of 2025, 15 million the year before. Global companies aren't relocating to India because they admire its culture. They're moving because China plus one is no longer a strategy, it's survival. And when you become the alternative to the world's factory, you don't just gain export revenue, you gain indispensability. Every iPhone assembled in Tamil Nadu is a reason for Washington to give India sanctions, waivers it won't grant Germany. Every semiconductor facility planned for Gujarat is leverage in negotiations with Brussels. Manufacturing isn't just economic policy, it's foreign policy conducted through supply chains. Now consider what happened during the Iran crisis. February 28, 2026. The United States and Israel launched Operation Epic Fury. Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei died in the first wave of strikes. 7 senior security officials gone. Iran's leadership decapitated in one morning. Within hours, the Strait of Hormuz closed. Not theoretically, actually closed. Tanker traffic dropped 70% in 48 hours. India imports 90% of its crude oil, half flows through Hormuz. Strategic reserves last 20 to 25 days, 3 weeks. That's the buffer between normal operations and economic catastrophe. Brent crude broke $100 a barrel. LPG shortages hit Indian states. Cooking gas prices climbed. The math was brutal. At $150 per barrel, India's annual import bill increases by 75 to 100 billion, economy-breaking numbers. Then, something extraordinary happened. March 13th. 2026. A large Indian-flagged gas carrier named Shivalik entered the Strait of Hormuz. No US Navy escort, no NATO protection, no insurance company willing to cover the risk. Just an Indian ship moving through a waterway that Iran had effectively blockaded. It made it through. Hours later, the Nanda Devi followed. Iran's ambassador to India confirmed what happened. India was being granted a safe corridor because the two nations share a common fate. Let that register. The most critical maritime choke point on Earth, through which 20% of the world's oil flows, was closed to every major power except one, India. Washington couldn't get its tankers through. Europe was locked out, but India crossed. Why? Because days earlier, when a US submarine torpedoed the Iranian warship Dina off Sri Lanka, India gave shelter to the surviving Iranian frigate at Kochi. 183 Iranian sailors housed at Indian naval facilities. External Affairs Minister Jai Shankar stood in Parliament and said it was the right thing to do. India wasn't caught between America and Iran. India was the only country with a phone line to both, and that access has monetary value measured in billions per day of continued oil flow. But access is fragile. It requires constant renewal. Every phone call to Tehran, every carefully worded UN statement, every decision to house Iranian sailors while standing beside Israeli defense ministers. Strategic autonomy isn't a permanent status. It's a performance you execute perfectly in real time under pressure, while nuclear-armed powers fight around you. The moment India definitively picks a side, the corridor closes. The Russian oil waiver disappears. The mediator role evaporates. India isn't trapped by this war. India is trapped by the exhausting necessity of being useful to everyone and committed to no one. Around 10 million Indians live and work across the Gulf states. $40 billion in annual remittances. 1/3 of India's total remittance inflows. Their safety depends on Arab monarchies now under Iranian drone attack. Their jobs depend on economies hemorrhaging capital as oil infrastructure burns. Every day the war continues is a day that buffer thins. Every week Hormuz stays contested is a week India's energy arithmetic gets harder. India holds the Guinness World Record for the largest civilian airlift. 1990 Kuwait. 170,000 people in 63 days. But 10 million is 59 times that scale. If even 10% needed emergency evacuation, that's 1 million people. No country has ever attempted an extraction at that magnitude. India pulled off Operation Rahat from Yemen, Operation Kaveri from Sudan, but those were thousands, not millions. And those operations happened when airspace was open and sea routes were clear. This time, both are contested. Here's the diplomatic tightrope India is walking. India co-sponsored anti-Iran resolutions at the UN Security Council. Modi visited Netanyahu weeks before the strikes. To much of the global south, India looks aligned with the security architecture that enables Israel. Simultaneously, India sheltered Iranian sailors. India crosses Hormuz when nobody else can. India takes Tehran's calls at midnight. Which India is real? Both, by design. That's exactly what makes it precarious. India chairs BRICS in 2026. Russia and China are pushing for a ceasefire. Iran's new supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, is leading a country with 3.2 million displaced people and decapitated military command. There's a deal to be made. India may be the only country with credibility to broker it. Tehran trusts India enough to grant safe passage. Washington trusts India enough to give oil waivers it won't offer NATO allies. That's real power, quietly accumulated, structural, patient, but power has expiry dates. India has 25 days of strategic reserves, a Chabahar port project hanging by sanctions threads, an LPG crisis building domestically, a new Iranian leader more hardline and radicalized than any Tehran has seen in decades. The game only works if the war ends soon. Every day it doesn't, reserves run lower. Phone calls to Tehran get harder while standing beside Israel. Strategic autonomy is India's greatest foreign policy achievement. It's also becoming India's greatest vulnerability. The doctrine that let India buy Russian S-400 systems and American drones simultaneously now forces India to shelter Iranian warships while maintaining defense partnerships with the country that sank them. The contradictions are compounding. India didn't choose this position. Geography chose it. 80% of seaborne oil trade moves through choke points India can see from its coast. 3 nuclear-armed neighbors. 2 contested oceans. The Indian Ocean carries India's name, but naming rights don't guarantee control. They guarantee you're in the room when decisions get made. Sometimes that's enough. Sometimes it just means you watch superpowers fight in your backyard and calculate how long your fuel reserves will last. 2 Indian gas carriers crossed Hormuz while the world watched from outside. That image is India's foreign policy thesis made visible. For 20 years, strategic autonomy was theory written in diplomatic cables. This war turned theory into practice. Iran trusts India enough to grant safe passage. Washington trusts India enough to give oil waivers. Tehran calls asking for mediation. Washington calls asking for stabilization. That's leverage. Real, tangible, unprecedented leverage. But leverage expires the moment you can't maintain the balance. India has weeks, not months. The Strait stays closed a little longer each day. The reserves drop a little lower. The performance gets harder to sustain. India isn't winning a war without fighting. India is running the most sophisticated middle ground strategy in the world right now. And it's working. But only if the war ends soon. Every day it doesn't, the cost of that strategy climbs, and the bill eventually comes due. Here is part 2 of 2, exactly 950 words. March 2026, an Iranian warship sinks 40 nautical miles south of Sri Lanka. Not in the Persian Gulf, not near Hormuz. In India's backyard, a US submarine fired the torpedo. The ship that went down, the Iris Dana, had been docked at an Indian port just weeks earlier for a naval review hosted by New Delhi. India invited this vessel. America sank it, and when the surviving Iranian frigate limped into the southern Indian port of Kochi asking for emergency shelter, India said yes and housed 183 Iranian sailors at its own naval facilities. Washington stayed silent. Tehran called India a friend. That's not confusion. That's strategy playing out at a level most countries can't even attempt. But here's what that incident actually revealed. India doesn't control the Indian Ocean. It just lives there. When superpowers decide to fight in waters that carry India's name, India finds out the same way everyone else does, by watching ships explode on radar. The ambition of being the regional security provider didn't sync with the DINA. It was never afloat to begin with. Now zoom out. The Indian Ocean isn't just another body of water with trade routes and naval patrols. It's the physical infrastructure holding globalization together. 80% of seaborne oil trade moves through 3 choke points here. Hormuz handles 40%. Malacca takes 35%. Bab el Mandeb gets 8%. If any one of those narrows closes for more than a week, you're not dealing with higher gas prices. You're dealing with entire economies going offline. The Strait of Malacca funnels 94,000 vessels a year through a channel that narrows to 1.5 nautical miles at the Phillip Channel near Singapore. A single well-placed minefield could choke 25% of the world's traded goods. Chinese manufactured products, Indonesian coffee, Malaysian palm oil, all of it stopped, and 35% of global oil transported by sea flows through that gap. There's no alternate route that doesn't add weeks and billions to the journey. Then there's Hormuz, 21 miles wide. 1/5 of the world's daily oil consumption squeezes through. When Iran threatened closure in 2025, Brent crude spiked 15% in one afternoon. Not because Iran actually closed it, because the threat alone was enough. That's veto power over the global economy, and Tehran knows it. India isn't winning a war without fighting. India is redefining what winning looks like when you can't afford to fight at all. The country that shelters Iranian sailors and buys Israeli missiles, that builds French jets with Russian engines, that signs trade deals with Europe while maintaining energy ties to Moscow, isn't confused. It's operating at a level of strategic sophistication most nations will never attempt. But sophistication has costs measured in fuel reserves that run 25 days deep, and phone calls that get harder every time the strait stays closed. The performance works until geography runs out of patience, and in the Indian Ocean, patience is already thin.